G'day everyone and welcome to the Porg Diaries, a chronological review of Star Wars. My name is Jack.
And my name's Simone.
And today we are covering the final cap-off to Wave 1 of the High Republic. That is the first story arc of the High Republic, I guess. So that's with Light of the Jedi and the previous couple books we've covered. Sort of finishes off that whole thing. So that is, today we're doing 10 comic issues. That is 5 issues of the High Republic, simply just called the High Republic, and 5 issues of the High Republic Adventures. There are also 2 short stories, one Starlight Go Together and the other Starlight First Duty.
Where should we start?
Okay, well, this time around we won't do the spoiler, non-spoiler thing because comics and short stories are, well, comics and short stories, so no point of doing that. And we won't really sort of go over the comics one by one.
Yeah, that's right.
More broadly, just the larger sort of stories and arcs in them.
Yeah, because they follow on from each other.
And with all of these, less of the short stories obviously, but the comics, they just continue on. So in the next wave, there is then, the next 5 issues, right? So there isn't necessarily just, okay, a book, that's that, this is that, and they're not as large and all the rest. So
shall we start with the short stories, do you think?
Yes. Okay. So the first short story is Starlight Go Together. That was written by Charles Soule and was actually published, the first part of it at least, was published before Light of the Jedi even released. The Starlight Go Together short stories were more written as a sort of a prelude and an aftermath of Light of the Jedi, whereas the following Starlight short stories are more sort of, standalone and more just sort of trying to flesh out the High Republic universe. So Starlight Part 1, Starlight Go Together Part 1, there we go, is... it's about Joss and Picker Adrian, who are 2 characters within the Light of the Jedi novel, but it's more focusing on them a little bit, gets you to know the characters a little bit more, which is
they're a good
nice.
team, aren't they?
Absolutely. Married couple and all the rest. And it is sort of like, it leads straight into Light of the Jedi. So it's sort of, it starts off, they're doing their own thing, and then at the end you go, oh, okay, here we go, and it goes right into the first sort of great disaster in the Light of the Jedi.
It actually is a great way to kickstart the story, I think.
How do you mean?
With having that as a starting point, and then they're tied through the story, as we go along. Right,
absolutely. You sort of get a full arc for them almost in the story,
right,
via this being the starting point, and then the other bit being the ending point as well. It's a nice sort of through line of it all. It's Charles Soule writing it means that it essentially feels like an extension of the novel.
It does.
To
be fair, like if you didn't read that short story and went straight to the novel, it'd probably be okay. But it is a good complement to it, and I think it's a good start as well.
No, of course. I mean, several people have read the book and probably don't even know about the short story, but. The short story merely complements it, you could pretty much just tack it on as like say the prologue or something to Light of the Jedi, and it would fit in perfectly fine. It would just click in nicely, because what it ultimately does, is it introduces you, fleshes out these 2 characters that you see in the book. It sort of introduces you to the world of the High Republic a little bit more, gets you to know about the Starlight Beacon before the immediate stakes are put upon you, which I think is good. I like that. But anyhow, so with the story, so you've got Starlight Beacons all wrapped up and done. That's how it sort of starts off. They're packing their bags. They're going to go on holidays. That's that. Then a disaster occurs, quote unquote. There's sort of a bit of a struggle. They've found a problem on the beacon. They need to go quickly solve it. And I felt that was very well written.
I did too. Well, it's sort of testament to the series thus far, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And Charles Soule, more specifically.
He's very good, yes.
He can write, I think, intense scenes very well. Probably the best one out of all of the authors thus far. He can write intense scenes really well. Like, they feel, you go, ooh.
Yeah. He didn't write the other short story, though, did he?
He hasn't written... no, I don't think he's written any other short stories thus far.
So I think, as we mentioned before, it's interesting how, there's a number of different authors that are writing these books. And I found that interesting when we'll talk in a moment with a series of comics where you've got a lot of different authors, but reading it through, they actually flow really well.
No, you're absolutely right. And ultimately, Charles Soule only did this short story more as an extension of the novel. So really, within Wave 1, the only thing that he did was Light of the Jedi, because you can say this is a bit of an extension of that. Which is interesting, because everyone else has, written all of these short stories, and they've done all of these other things, and that's sort of the main thing that he did, which is just, part of the initiative, and is an interesting part of the whole publishing side of things.
I agree.
But, I think it also, it fleshes out. So it's a little bit humorous, which is nice, but I think it's also Charles Soule's style, and once again makes you feel a lot closer, or at least gets you a lot more connected to Joss and Picaradron, who are characters that show up in the novel, and I guess it's just sort of like, it's just a nice little through line. And then the ending, the other part of the short story, which is, Starlight Go Together Part 2, is set after Light of Jedi. So it's almost like a little ending, like a epilogue.
And again, I think it's a really great way to finish off that particular story as well.
I agree, 100%. So
I would recommend people reading both of those.
I agree. I think so far they're probably the best short stories.
And in fact, we should say that the way that we did read it was we read the short story before and after the book, which I really enjoyed as well.
And it's also like it's like that nice little thing of, okay, so the short story starts off with, oh, we're going to go on holidays. Oh, sorry, everything happens, and then the rest of the book happens, and then how does the short story end? Like the second one, oh, we're going on holidays.
That's
it's
right,
like
exactly.
That's like a really great a great way of, because you could have very easily just written them sort of just be, okay, well, that's that. But it's a nice little through line, and also sets up the characters to show up later. Like it gives them. This is the second short story.
Yes.
It gives them a, like a role that, okay, we're going to see these guys again. Like, doesn't necessarily mean you'll see them in the next book.
I think also because they're not sort of the main characters of, they're not Jedi, but it's a nice opportunity to flesh out the non-Jedi important characters, I think. That's a really
good point. Gives perspective to the universe because obviously so many of these novels are just like, Into the Dark, A Test of Courage, and Light of the Jedi. All of the main characters in those books are Jedi.
Exactly.
Yeah. And while obviously that's awesome and we want to see the Jedi, ultimately it's you also do want to see what are other people doing. What is the universe like in this point of time for the regular people? Because the Jedi are only one facsimile of the system, and so if this is the height of the Republic, well, how does the height look like to others? You know what I'm saying? And that's what we see through these guys, which I completely agree. It gives the commoner's perspective almost as a for lack of a better word.
And should we go on to the second short story now?
Yeah. So overall, what would you give it out of 10? What do you reckon?
Oh, I think as a collective, a good solid 8 or 9. And as I said, for me, it really tied in with the book. If you didn't read them, you're still going to enjoy the book, but it definitely, in my opinion, enhances it.
Agreed. Worth reading.
I think so. What's your score?
Let's say 8 out of 10. I agree. Yep.
Great.
Okay, so the next short story is called First Duty. And this one was written by Kevin Scott, who wrote all of the comics in the first bit. And that one introduces Velko Jartan, I think it is, or Jatan, something like that. As the common thing with the High Republic thus far, what we've found is that the pronunciations of lots of different character names have varied between who's doing them and whatnot.
That's right.
I remember there was this funny question in like this, like the official High Republic questionnaire thing, where someone asked, so how do you pronounce Markion? Is it Markion or Marchion? Because in the audiobooks, they pronounce it Marchion, but then all of the authors pronounce it Markion, and then blah, 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 blah.
I prefer Markion,
I do too. Honest. But they asked the question, and the people said, yeah, well, we've been working with Markion, but if you use Marchion, who cares? And it's like, all right, fair enough. And they said, just like in the real universe, people pronounce things differently. And he goes, yep, that's pretty fair enough. So anyhow,
this book also introduces a new character.
Yes, with all the short story. Velko Jartan, or Jatan, what it doesn't know. And she shows up in later short stories. She's like sort of like almost like the main character for these Starlight short stories, which is kind of interesting. And I think she shows up in like other comics and whatnot, and all the rest. But basically, her character is, she's just come on board, she's just sort of, and it's worth saying that the part 1, part 2 of this one is like a proper like it's like a proper story, part 1, part 2, rather than those other ones which are sort of separate prologue, aftermath. This is more like, it's like okay, here's a full short story that we've split up, that kind of thing. Anyways, so she just arrives on the beacon, Starlight Beacon. She's sort of like, okay, what's going on here? Bit overwhelmed by things. The great disaster has just happened. Everyone's sort of, oh my god, they're all freaking out, everything's happening. And so she is tasked to look after this one bloke who's like had damage done to him or something. And disaster strikes. It looks like, an assassination attempt on him. Oh, what's going to happen? Oh my goodness gracious, all that sorts of stuff. It ends up that it's a plot by him because political rivalries. He wants to blame it on the other people and all that sorts of stuff. Now, what I think was interesting about this is, once again, the same thing happened. Gave you a perspective of the non-Jedi characters. Sure. Even though it is on the Starlight Beacon, which is where all the other Jedi characters have been, it's still nice to see someone that isn't a Jedi. What's their perspectives? It's nice to see some of the sort of political intrigue, for lack of a better term, in the galaxy, So it's, there's still political turmoil, you know what I'm saying? Not to the extent that we see later on, obviously, but it's still there. And that's interesting and good to know. I think it's also interesting that on top of all that, there's this sort of sense of like chaos after the emergences, and it shows you that Light of the Jedi ended, they have a celebration ceremony, but it didn't just end, it wasn't like that's that, right. Like there was what's happening next, which I think is interesting, and interestingly enough, or like a little connective thing, which, because of course these things love to do like a little connective thing, so such as you have Estella Maro show up in this, who then shows up in the comic, stuff like that, right? Like, which I love, those little sort of things. And at the very end of this short story, it ends with them going, right, something, we're off to this place, which is the place that they, start off in the comic, which is like one of those sort of little neat things, tie-ins that you wouldn't normally notice, but it's a cool little way of setting it all up. What do you think? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I liked this story. I thought it was an interesting story. Unlike the other one, you don't necessarily have to read it. Like for me, it is a lot more standalone.
Sure.
It was good. It was interesting. If you wanted just another, piece to this series, then absolutely add it in. I didn't love it as much as the other one, but I did enjoy. Like, it was an interesting story.
Yep. No, I agree with that. I think not as good, definitely. No, I agree with that. Probably not as well written.
No.
And also about characters that inherently you care a little bit less about because they're not the main characters of the big long novels that you've had hours to spend with. It's like you get 15 minutes to spend with them, and you're like,
That's
okay.
right.
You know,
That's
okay.
right. And you sort of think, well, okay, where else am I? And maybe they, perhaps in later series, maybe we'll see them again and they'll tie in. But at this point, it was a nice to have, not a have to have.
Right. No, I agree with that. I do. It's like, you've got this story that ultimately isn't necessary on any level, but it's simply there to flesh out the universe and give you another little piece of the High Republic to read. Which is just interesting, just interesting.
So I'd probably give that one, I'm going to go a 6 out of 10.
I'm honestly saying 5 out of 10. Maybe.
Oh, okay, fair enough. There you go. We're not enticing people initially to rush into that one, but
Look, bro, that's a little harsh. No, it was okay. So I'm going to say 6 out of 10. I'll agree with you there. But it's nothing fantastic. It's nothing special. But it's nice enough for what it's trying to do.
And so that was the last short story
of Wave 1.
And so now we'll talk about, there was quite a number of comics that fit in here. And I'll have to be perfectly honest, full transparency, when Jack was telling me about we're going to also add in these comics, I did have a bit of an eye roll. I don't, as you know, Jack, don't love a comic as my choice of reading. However, I was pleasantly surprised, I'm just going to say as an overall, how really well, unlike what we've just said, these comics fitted into what we'd been reading. And I really enjoyed them. And again, it was another great opportunity to flesh out some of those characters that we've seen in the books and from different perspectives, and also just to see what's been going on, what's everything else that's been going on. So I will eat my words there in terms of not enjoying. I probably now, after reading all of these, do enjoy a comic a little more than I used to.
That's fair. No, I do recall your reluctance of, don't know about but gave it a read. Ends up they were pretty good.
There was. And I think there were 10 in total?
In total, yep.
5
on each series. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about...
Not overly long either, so...
Oh, well...
Which was...
Well, no, they're just regular comic issues, so... just the regular sort, nothing special. So we'll talk about the mainline High Republic first, I suppose, which is simply just called the High Republic.
Yep.
And so that one... So the first issue is sort of separate from the rest, in that the first issue is sort of almost like a prologue to the rest of the series. Doesn't tie in much to the rest of it, but it's sort of a prologue. And so the first one, it's like directly at the end of Light of the Jedi and A Test of Courage and all those other ones, at the dedication ceremony.
Yes.
It's a few hours before it, and it introduces us to Keeve Trennis, who is our main character for the comic line, and Jedi Master Skier, who is Keeve's master, and introduces us to them. We saw Skier briefly in Light of the Jedi. He was Jorah Marley's good friend, I guess. And during the Battle of Kur, he lost his arm, to which then that's where they start us off in here with he's lost his arm. He's a Trandoshan Jedi, which is interesting, because he's like this huge burly lizard guy. And normally in Star Wars, all of those guys are bad guys. That's sort of the cliche. And so it's interesting that they make him a Jedi, which is cool. So during this whole thing, we get we get Skier, we get Keeve Trennis, and basically it's her final sort of step up to become a Jedi Knight. Yep. And she has to go through trials, and they do this whole thing. And an interesting thing is I think it just shows you that it once again fleshes out the universe a bit, in that we get to see some new planets, we get to see what's happening on Starlight Beacon before it all. The best thing I love about these comics is it visualizes these characters.
Yes, I love that too. Yeah.
Is that, okay, so we've read about Ava Chris, we know that she has blonde hair, we know that she has a green lightsaber, blah, 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 blah. So we have a mental image, but then they show us, and it's great, and it's like, okay, so that is what you're talking
That's
about.
Right.
And it's really cool and interesting to see them in action, and just to see them, especially with characters like Skier, who is so unique as this huge hulking character, and then they represent them in the comic, and it's actually quite cool, like really awesome to see them with all of the Jedi garb of the High Republic, all golden and flowy and whatnot. It's quite
very
interesting.
Well illustrated, actually.
That's one thing I will say. The High Republic comics so far, bellissimo, excellent illustrations, and that goes for like the covers of the books as well. It's like the illustrations are really, really well done.
They're really good. Okay, so looking as a collective, the High Republic, as you said, is predominantly Kiev and Skier, and going through. I guess. Have we got a spoiler? A spoiler option here, or do we just sort of talk about...
I said at the start, spoilers don't really matter, I suppose, for this one, because ultimately comics are comics, right? So it's like, they're short. Yeah.
There is an expectation, I must say, that you would know that Jorah Marley has passed away at this point, because it does talk about that, and I think the good thing about that, because he was... Skier and Jorah Marley were very close, which you get a sense of in the book, but it really delves into that, I think, here.
To an extent,
and the effects on him, and the struggles that he's had from, I think, that loss, but also his own experience in the battle.
I think also what's interesting is that what I find interesting as well is that, there's sort of this interesting thing around it where it really sort of, I don't know how to say it, really sort of talks about these characters in a way that is quite nuanced while also not being as exhaustive as, say, a book or something, right? Which is quite interesting, because most comics it's just like flashy swords and that's that, right? But this it properly delves into the characters, talks about them, explores what they're feeling.
Yes.
Which I find interesting, because all of the comics, like, they have like little monologues, and this includes both High Republic Adventures and normal. They have like these monologues where they're like, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm thinking, which I find really interesting, and it shows weakness in the current High Republic characters, but normal weaknesses, what you would expect for characters to have, which I think is really interesting and important to show that, it is the height, it is the zenith, but they're not perfect.
That's right.
Which I feel is like part of the whole point of the High Republic, is that, you've got these imperfect Jedi, but that's what makes them better than the Jedi of the later years. You know what I'm saying?
That's
which I think is quite interesting. So I guess we should talk about the plot. So the first issue is kind of separate. So that just sets them all up, and it ends with Kiev becoming a Jedi Knight.
That's
right. She gets dubbed and ascends into knighthood, and that's sort of how it ends. Sort of okay, and it ends with the Jedi dedication ceremony. All is well. Okay, cool. Issues 2 to 5 is where the main story happens, and that is quite crucial because it's all to deal with the Drengir.
Yes.
Which I find really interesting, because Light of the Jedi didn't have Drengir. Test of Courage didn't have Drengir. The High Republic Adventures, the other comic series, doesn't have Drengir. The short stories do not have Drengir. The only thing in Wave 1 that has Drengir is Into the Dark. And this comic series, which I think is quite interesting, is that they chose to explore it here, which I think is good though, because these, like the Drengir, lend themselves really well to comics. Don't you reckon?
Very much so. And as you were saying, just to be able to visualize what the Drengir look like.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they lend themselves super well, like really interesting. And their whole dark side thing, and it also explores the Drengir just a little bit more as well, and it properly sort of because Into the Dark, it sort of had all the characters and the book with going, oh, okay, so the Drengir are done, that's that, cool, good.
Yeah.
This book properly goes, okay, let's introduce the Drengir as proper villains. Here they are. Let's go, and you properly have it all set up, and it's properly sort of delved into and whatnot, and you see the aftermath of it within Skier as he sort of gets the Drengia in him and makes him go dark side, and there's this whole thing about which way is he going to turn, and it ends ultimately on a cliffhanger really, where he sort of just goes unconscious.
Yes.
And that's sort of that, and you go, oh, what's happened to him? Is he dead?
That's right.
And which he's, spoiler alert, he's not dead. But it's like it's that whole setup that makes you go, oh, what's happened? What's happened? It's really interesting. And how Keeve deals with that, how Avar deals with that.
Also, I thought it was a really interesting perspective what they delved into of master and apprentice.
Go on.
With Keeve and Skier. I think they explored their relationship a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was quite different to some of the other ones that we've seen, because they're both different characters. Like to your point before, Skier being Trandoshan, and then Keeve as the apprentice really had to step up when her master was going through a really challenging time. So I found that quite interesting.
And what's also interesting is that they are no longer master and apprentice.
That's true.
Right?
That is true, actually.
But they've just gotten out of master and apprentice, so she still feels very connected and very sort of almost subservient to him,
right.
like as if she should follow orders when really they are equals now.
That's right.
Which she doesn't really feel that. Like you can tell that's not really where she's at in her headspace. She isn't at the point where we're equals.
That's right.
She is, it's like that whole thing where it's like, it's the point of getting from Anakin and Obi-Wan in episode 2 when they're master and apprentice to Anakin and Obi-Wan in episode 3 when they're equals. And you can tell that, right?
Yes.
And that's ultimately what this is all about. It's like Keeve has to get to that point.
That transition, isn't it?
But with with Skier getting so dark side and so angry and all that, and for Keeve to deal with all that, like there's still like it's not opening this a gap for her to be able to get to that point of equalness, right? Which is I think that's a really interesting thing that's explored. Avar Kriss, we see a lot of her.
We do.
She's awesome. Love Avar Kriss. And then Hutts show up.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Megara the Hutt or something like that, who is this new Hutt we've never seen, and she is just a Hutt. She's one of the Hutts.
Again, great visuals, hey?
Absolutely. And then she's like riding on like this crazy thing, and she's got the Rancors, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And ultimately they have to deal with the Drengia together, because obviously the Drengia don't really care whether you're Hutt or Jedi, they'll attack you nonetheless. And it concludes with this sort of thing of like them forming this alliance, forming this this team, this like, okay, well, you're crooks, we're Jedi, but ultimately we need to team up to take out like this super big threat, which I think is really interesting, and interesting for someone like Avar Kriss, who is meant to be the quote unquote perfect Jedi, to team up with someone that's like, bad bastards, and it's like.
But it's interesting because anyone that knows Star Wars knows the Hutts, and it's always very one-dimensional bad guys. So, I mean, you see it that the Alliance is very much for the same. They've got one goal of trying to rid the Drengi, but I did find that a really interesting, an interesting decision to have them line up together.
I agree. Cool. Also, that and this one seemed to do it a lot more than all the other ones, to just have lots of characters show up. So like they had Vinestra Rowe and Imri Kantoros from the A Test of Courage novels. They just sort of showed up, helped out a little bit, just sort of...
Yeah, no, it was good.
They just sort of teamed up. It's like, okay, that's cool. You have a little bit of a team up there, like you didn't need to... like there was no requirement to have these two in it, but I should let me repeat that. Worth noting that this was written by Kevin Scott. Should put that out there. And so, and I think ultimately he just did a really good job.
I agree. So what's your rating on this?
Well, I will just say one thing. Is that I think the Drengia are somewhat presented a little differently between Into the Dark and the comics. So like the way they're written, the way they are presented, the way they act, it's just a little bit differently. Into the Dark, they're a little bit more sophisticated. They can carry things. It's just a bit different.
That's true.
And I don't really. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing per se. I think I prefer the comics depiction of them, honestly. But I think it's just interesting and worth noting that there's definitely sort of a bit of a difference there. I just think that's probably worth noting.
That's true. Yep, I agree. I don't think it's I don't think it's an issue.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. Definitely not. And so that's why ultimately I'd probably go like 8 with this.
Yeah, I would definitely go an 8. I really enjoyed it. I really like Keeve, actually.
It was just solid storytelling.
Yeah, very much so.
It was just really good storytelling that like really fleshed out and just told good story.
Agreed.
And once again with these comics they continue on.
Yes.
So in the next thing, in wave 2, it will talk about this same story, just whatever's going on there, you know what I'm saying?
That's great.
Which I think is good.
Good extension.
Okay.
Next lot.
The High Republic Adventures. Written by Daniel Jose Older.
Yep.
Love that man. Absolute legend. Whenever you see him on interviews, he's hilarious. Love him. He just seems like such a nice guy. Like, what an excellent fellow.
Okay, I'll have to watch an interview.
No, he's just like they're all nice, but it's him in particular. It's like you listen to him and you go, oh, what a nice man. You know what I'm saying? So and he writes this one. Now this comic's probably a little bit for younger audiences, generally speaking. And that's very intentional, written for a younger audience. But what I think's great about it is that very easily you could have this story just lean into childish sort of territory, and we would sort of go, okay, well, it's for children. Guess that's that. But they managed to make it. They managed to treat its audience with enough respect, and like children, that they can tell stories that are actually somewhat compelling to an extent,
That's right.
and tell kind of real life issues. So you have Zine Mrala, I think that's her name.
Yes.
And she lives on this planet where they have sort of got this almost religious sort of outlook of like, okay, no force.
No force, yeah.
You cannot practice the force. It is not allowed. And that means that, with that whole thing happening, you sort of go, oh, okay, so Zine, who does have the force, she's being sort of
shunned. Yeah, that's
and
right. Well, it's like it being like a secret she's had to hide.
Exactly.
Which we've never seen that perspective before. People are often,
Precisely.
I guess boasting somewhat about their skills where she's had to hide it.
Exactly.
So I thought that was a really interesting perspective. And you're right, absolutely. I think even though it's aimed at a younger audience, I've still really enjoyed it. I found it a very enjoyable book, and I think it was really relevant to the series as well.
Agreed.
And new characters were introduced, but unlike, the short story we mentioned earlier, I found them really relevant to the story and would highly recommend reading this, in conjunction.
And it's interesting how relevant it is to the rest of the stories, in the sense that it features none other than Markion Rowe.
That's right. It's great.
It's like you would sort of expect, okay, well, this is for younger audiences. It's not going to be that important to read. It's probably just, a silly side story kind of thing. But Markion Rowe shows up, and he does things that are important later down the line. So once again, it's one of those things where you don't have to read it, right? Like if you hadn't read it, it wouldn't change anything in the long run. You know, you would still understand stories that go on.
But Jack, that said, I think the two main characters that are introduced here, Zine and Crix. I think that they will play a larger part when we move forward. Well, it'll be interesting to see, but I'll see them in later stories.
No, I agree. And Zine, especially allying with Markion, and Markion almost sort of taking him under his wing.
Crix, you mean? Yeah, Crix allying with Markion.
So yeah.
Zine, and then Zine aligns with the Jedi.
With the Jedi, which is just, you know, that it just inherently means something can come of that. And also, I mean, I will say one thing, which is just great, is that it's so funny.
It is funny, yeah. It's well written.
It's Daniel Jose Older is possibly the funniest writer out of all of them. You know, like, he has successfully managed to create this story that is super, super humorous. It's like buckets of blood. You know,
I love Bucks of Blood. I think it's your favourite character.
It probably is my favourite character. You know, it's like...
But he's got, and again, great illustrations of him.
And it's like, you know, so what does Daniel Jose Older say? He says, oh, no, well, you know, the buckets of blood, no. He puts the blood back in the body. It's like, which is based upon one of his experiences when he was a medic.
Yes, that's
right.
right.
And there was someone who, on the ambulance line, which you're not meant to do, you're meant to just go and use, like, the correct stat reports and all that. Instead, this bloke sort of logged on, and no one knew who he was, and he just titled himself, Buckets of Blood is in action! and no one understood it. But I just think that's a great... Like, that's a great anecdote. And the fact that he's used it for this is awesome.
Yeah, I agree. No, that's great.
Which is the great thing about writers and authors, is that they pull things from their real life and put it into stories, and you get great occurrences like this. And that guy's hilarious. Yoda, he's just part of this series. Awesome. I love Yoda. He's great. You know.
He's great, and he's with the younglings. Isn't he? Is he?
Yeah. And the only disappointing thing is that Yoda at the end goes away. It's like, no. Stay with us, Yoda.
I know. But I do wonder, though, I think we've talked about this before, I think they purposely keep Yoda at a distance because, obviously, we all know Yoda, and we want to learn and get to know and get invested in the High Republic characters.
No.
So I think it's quite purposeful, don't you?
No, you're absolutely right. Because ultimately the thing is that Yoda, we know he's not going to die. You know, we know he's not going to have some drastic change, you know.
That's right.
Ultimately, he has to remain a semi-stationary character.
Yes.
Which is fine for a story like this, because then he sort of serves a mentor role, a somewhat humorous role, and then they push him away at the end, which is a good idea, I think, because for something like the High Republic Adventures, he works fine. You know, he works quite nicely in these stories because he's teaching with younglings, he's with that whole thing. But when he's like in a main book, which they haven't put him in like any of the novels, because as soon as he shows up in any of the main novels, he instantly sort of like takes up the story.
Of course.
Because you instantly go, oh my god, it's Yoda, and then all stakes are removed, because as soon as he's in like, say, a combat situation, you know that he's going to win.
That's right.
Or he's going to get knocked out or something, in which then he'll still survive. You know, it's like...
And he does, and I think to your point, you know he does survive, obviously. Whereas all the other characters, the interesting thing about this is we don't know.
Literally no idea.
They're all, you know, brand new, and it was set back
200 years prior. Yeah. They could kill anyone at all. Like, literally anyone. Even people that you're like, you know, or not sure they'll... I don't think though. Yes, they will. Like,
That's
like,
right.
like, you know, like the authors have just gone, oh yeah, we'll just kill anyone.
Yes,
they're vicious. They're crazy, man. You know, I mean,
that's right.
The poster for one of the Wave 3 novels had on it literally "Who will survive." Like that was the tagline. The tagline was just "Who will survive," and it had every single character that you know and love on there. And it just means, oh, okay, great. So they're just happy to kill anyone.
But it adds to, like, I think it's quite compelling.
Oh, I agree.
It's a really good part.
Well, when you're watching Revenge of the Sith, you're not watching it and going, I wonder if Obi-Wan's going to survive this. Like, you have watched A New Hope, you know he's going to survive.
Yeah,
exactly. there's no, the tension isn't there for this reason, it's there for this other reason that whatever the movie does, right? And I think that's the great thing. But more specifically with the High Republic Adventures comics, just going into a little bit further, I think, once again, the art style, really good. Different.
Agreed. It is different.
But good.
Still very good.
I think, once again, humorous. I like that. Very, very charming as well. Like, all of the characters feel, very... they, yes, they're all children and whatnot, and that's also very much, the...
Well, it plays to the audience.
Intention.
Yeah,
yep.
That's right.
But I feel like that isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's this really where they just hug.
Yeah,
they just hug. Right. They just hug all the time. You're like, that's nice. I like that. That's very charming. That's very nice. I think all the characters are cool. Yoda's cool. I love Yoda, man. And then the whole Crix and Zine back and forth is quite interesting as well. And ultimately, I would give it a 7.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go an 8 actually for this one. I really liked it. And I would, regardless of age, I would highly recommend people to read this series as well.
Do you enjoy it better or worse than the other ones?
Oh, that's a good question. The other one was probably, again, the other one was aimed
older,
so that is
more
appealing.
Advanced storytelling.
Right.
Yep.
So for that reason, I think you've got a deeper plot.
Fair.
But just in terms of pure writing, styles and whatnot, I'm gonna go even.
Fair.
Yep.
No, fair.
That's good.
Fair. That's absolutely fair.
In wrap up, I think definitely both series are worth reading. The first lot of short stories that we mentioned are great. The last one, take it or leave it. And then, so our next podcast, Jack, is going to be focused on
Wave 2.
The Wave 2.
So I think we'll do similar to what we did last time. We'll do a full podcast on the Rising Storm.
Yes.
Then we'll do a second podcast with like a 2-bit kind of thing on Race to Crash Point Tower, which is the junior novel, and Out of the Shadows, which is the young adult novel. Mm-hmm. Now, we can do the comics and short stories again, of which there's probably the same amount with the next one. The difference is that they have added a few more, comics, short comics, like short-run comics, and also they have done an audio drama, Tempest Runner,
yes.
which is an interesting one. We'll have to decide whether we want to make that a full podcast or include that with something else or whatever we do.
I'm really excited to talk about that because that's one of my favourite characters. But anyway, we won't give any of that away now. But I think that's a wrap for today.
Yeah.
Wave 1 done.
Complete. On to Wave 2 with the Rising Storm, which is set a year after, everything that happened. Yeah. In Wave 1, which is I think in and of itself that's an interesting decision, and all of the stuff that happened and that we're talking about in this podcast, like all of the comics and whatnot, actually plays out in the next wave quite considerably, which I think is quite impressive.
Agreed.
And is cool.
We'll talk about that next time.
So ultimately, I think overall Wave 1 High Republic quite successful.
Very good.
I've enjoyed it.
Me too.
I think just generally speaking, Wave 1 is just a really solid piece.
I agree.
Of literature, and they've done it successfully.
Definitely. So, and I look forward to talking about Wave 2 very soon.
Absolutely.
Over and out.
Okay. Thank you for watching, everyone. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share it around. Give it a like. Can't give it a dislike because YouTube is silly. And other than that,
see you next time.
Au revoir.
Ciao.